The valley floor was a graveyard of ambition. What had begun 3 days ago as a confident sweep by the entire 2nd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment had devolved into a desperate, static defense. 300 elite soldiers, the razor's edge of American infantry, were now trapped, pinned down in the crucible of a perfectly executed ambush. Major Cade Thorne, the battalion's commander, lay behind a low stone wall that had once marked a farmer's field, the dust of Afghanistan coating his face and filling his lungs. The air was a cacophony of incoming fire, a relentless storm of machine gun chatter, mortar explosions, and the high-velocity crack of sniper rounds. His men were performing with the grim courage he expected of them. But courage was a finite resource when measured against the overwhelming mathematics of their situation. The enemy was not some ragtag militia. They were a well-armed, well-commanded force numbering in the thousands, and they held the high ground on all sides. High above the chaos, nestled in a rocky outcrop nearly 2 kilometers away, Sergeant Anya Sharma watched the battle unfold through the powerful optics of her M2010 sniper rifle. Known by the call sign Echo, she was a quiet, almost forgettable attachment to the battalion, a specialist whose role was only appreciated when it was needed. Beside her, her spotter, Corporal Ben Carter, frantically spoke into his radio, relaying trajectory data and enemy positions that were immediately swallowed by the larger storm of the battalion's desperate fight for survival. To Major Thorne on the ground, Echo was just another asset, a pair of eyes on a ridge, their contribution a drop of rain in a hurricane. He had barely spoken to the sniper team during the mission briefing, his focus entirely on the main body of his force. Snipers were a tool for surgical strikes, and this was a battle of sledgehammers. He had underestimated the value of a scalpel in a slaughterhouse. The situation was deteriorating with every passing minute. 2 of Thorne's companies were on the verge of being overrun, their positions systematically dismantled by coordinated mortar fire. His casualty count was climbing at a terrifying rate, the calls for medics becoming a constant, desperate chorus on the comms network. They were bleeding out, running low on ammunition, and the enemy was beginning to tighten the noose, their fighters moving with disciplined confidence down the scree slopes of the surrounding mountains. Thorne knew that without immediate reinforcement or massive air support, his command would be wiped out. They might last a few more hours, but the end was a mathematical certainty. The hope he clung to was the fundamental promise of the American military machine: no one gets left behind. Reinforcements would come. The sky would fill with gunships. It had to. At the Combat Operations Center, a sterile, air-conditioned world away in Bagram, Colonel Davies stared at the same battle on a bank of high-definition screens. The red icons representing enemy forces vastly outnumbered the blue icons of the 2nd Battalion. He saw the casualty reports streaming in, the desperate calls for support. He also saw the bigger picture, the map of the entire province, where other units were now being probed by coordinated enemy attacks. The ambush in the valley was not an isolated event. It was the opening move of a massive, province-wide offensive. The battalion had walked into the jaws of a dragon, and Davies now had to decide whether to sacrifice his arm to save the rest of the body. His face was a mask of cold, pragmatic calculus. He was a commander who dealt in acceptable losses, and the loss of the 2nd Battalion, as catastrophic as it was becoming acceptable when weighed against the potential collapse of his entire area of operations. Rescuing them would require diverting every asset he had, weakening his other positions, and risking a domino effect of failures across the province. He made the decision, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he spoke to his staff. "We can't save them. We have to contain this. Order a general retreat for all other units in the sector. Pull them back to the forward operating bases. Deny all reinforcement to the 2nd. Their sacrifice will buy us the time we need to regroup and hold the line." An order, heavy with the weight of 300 lives, went out across the command network. It was a death sentence, wrapped in the sterile language of military necessity. The order reached Major Thorne's command post like a physical blow. The voice from the COC was clear, concise, and utterly damning. "Ares, 6, this is Warlord Actual. You are ordered to break contact and withdraw to designated extraction point Sierra. All other assets in your sector are being pulled back. No support is available. I repeat, no support is available. Acknowledge." Thorne stared at his radio handset, as if it were a venomous snake. "Break contact," he roared to his executive officer. "We have enemy on 3 sides and a river at our back. Break contact is a fantasy. He wants us to run, to leave our wounded and get shot in the back. He's feeding us to the wolves." The command was not just a tactical impossibility. It was a profound betrayal. The promise had been broken. They were being left for dead. On the ridge 2 kilometers away, Anya Sharma and Ben Carter heard the same order. They were outside the main kill zone, with a clear, if hazardous, route of exfiltration to the east. Carter immediately began to pack his gear, his movements quick and professional. The order was the order. Survival was paramount. "Echo, let's go," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to move before they decide to sweep these hills." Sharma did not move. She remained in her firing position, her eye pressed to her scope, her breathing slow and even. She was watching a platoon from Charlie Company being systematically cut to pieces by a heavy machine gun nest. She saw the green tracers stitch across their position, saw men fall, saw the raw, unfiltered reality of the order Colonel Davies had just given. "Echo, did you hear me?" Carter pressed, his voice rising in panic. "Command is leaving them. We have to go. Now." Sharma took a slow, deliberate breath. She zoomed in with her scope, placing her crosshairs directly on the machine gunner who was wreaking such havoc. In her mind, the chaos of the battle receded, the radio chatter faded, and all that remained was the simple, perfect geometry of the shot. The target, the wind, the spin of the earth, the fall of the bullet. It was a world she understood, a world she could control. She looked at the hundreds of soldiers below, men she barely knew but for whom she was now the last, infinitesimal hope. "Forget the orders, Ben," she said, her voice a quiet whisper that was almost lost in the wind. "Get on the horn to the major. Tell him he's about to get some support." Ben Carter stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "Anya, you can't be serious," he stammered, using her first name for the first time since they'd been deployed. "This is a direct order from the colonel. They'll court-martial us. We'll be branded as deserters in reverse." Sharma didn't take her eye from the scope. "They can't court-martial us if we're dead," she replied, her voice still unnervingly calm. "And if we leave, everyone down there dies. I'm not leaving them." Her certainty was absolute, a granite wall against which his fear could find no purchase. He saw the look in her eye, the focused, unwavering commitment of a person who had made a decision from which there was no retreat. He was a soldier. He was trained to follow orders. But he was also a man, and the raw morality of the moment was inescapable. He took a deep breath, his loyalty to her, to the quiet, unassuming sergeant who had never missed a shot, overriding his fear of the consequences. He nodded. "Okay, what's the plan?" "The plan," she said, "is to make them regret starting this fight." She keyed her own radio, switching to the battalion's command channel, a direct line to Major Thorne. "Ares 6, this is Echo 3. Be advised, I am disregarding Warlord's directive. I am not withdrawing. I have eyes on the entire valley. Talk to me, sir. Where do you want the rain to fall?" The transmission was a profound shock to Thorne. In the midst of betrayal and despair, here was this lone voice of defiance. He didn't know who this sniper was, but her insubordination was the first glimmer of hope he'd had in an hour. He was still furious, still skeptical. What could one rifle possibly do against an army? "Echo 3, I don't know who the hell you think you are, but you are in violation of a direct order," he snarled back, the force of habit overriding his desperation. Her reply was immediate and all business. "Sir, with respect, the colonel is not under fire. You are. I have a confirmed heavy machine gun position on the northern ridge, coordinates 0479er. They are tearing up your Charlie Company. Do I have permission to engage, or would you prefer to discuss protocol?" It was a moment of truth. Trust the ghost on the mountain or die following the orders of the man who had abandoned him. Thorne didn't hesitate. "Light them up, Echo," he said, his voice a low growl. "Light them all up." Anya Sharma's world compressed to the space between her eye and the glass of her scope. The chaos of the battle below was no longer a terrifying storm. It was a target-rich environment. Her mind became a cold, biological computer, processing variables with a speed that was beyond mere training. Windage, elevation, humidity, Coriolis effect. All were calculated and accounted for in the instant it took her to exhale. Her first shot was a statement. The heavy machine gunner on the northern ridge who had been tormenting Charlie Company collapsed over his weapon without a sound, a neat, dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. The 1,800-meter shot was a masterpiece of the sniper's art. Before the man's assistant gunner could even process what had happened, a second round followed, and the nest fell silent. On the ground, the men of Charlie Company felt the pressure on them vanish as if a switch had been thrown. They looked up at the ridge, confused and grateful. In his command post, Thorne heard the report from his Charlie Company commander, his voice filled with disbelief. "Sir, the HMG nest is down. I don't know how, but it's gone." Before Thorne could reply, Sharma's voice was in his ear again, calm and methodical. "Next target. Mortar team, Western Slope, coordinates 0468. 2 men. Engaging." 2 more shots, so close together they sounded like one. The mortar team, which had been raining death on the battalion's aid station, was eliminated. The work began in earnest. Sharma and Carter operated as a seamless unit. Carter scanned the battlefield with his high-powered spotting scope, identifying high-value targets, commanders, communications specialists, heavy weapon crews. He would call out the coordinates and wind data, and before he could finish the sentence, Sharma's rifle would crack, and the target would be neutralized. She was not just killing the enemy. She was surgically dismantling their ability to fight. She was sowing chaos and confusion, turning their overwhelming advantage into a liability. An enemy commander directing an assault on Alpha Company dropped mid-shout. A forward observer calling in mortar strikes vanished from his perch. An RPG team moving to flank the battalion headquarters was eliminated one by one in the space of 10 seconds. Each shot was a hammer blow against the enemy's morale. They had walked into the valley expecting to slaughter a trapped and abandoned enemy. They had not expected to be hunted by an invisible, impossibly lethal ghost on the mountain. The enemy commanders were not fools. They quickly realized their forces were being systematically decapitated by a single, highly effective sniper. The seemingly random deaths of their key personnel were too precise to be coincidence. They adapted. Orders were shouted into radios, and the focus of a portion of their army shifted from the Rangers in the valley to the Ghost in the hills. They sent hunter-killer teams, squads of their own hardened soldiers, up the slopes to find and eliminate the source of their problems. For Sharma and Carter, the battle now had 2 fronts, the one they were waging on the enemy below and the one for their own survival. Carter put down his spotting scope and picked up his rifle, watching their back trail. "Echo, we've got company," he whispered, his voice tense. 2 teams, moving fast, coming up the eastern draw. Sharma never took her eye from her scope, never stopped her methodical destruction of the enemy command structure. "Keep them busy," she said. "Don't let them get close enough to pin us down." What followed was a deadly dance of cat and mouse on the mountainside. Carter, a superb marksman in his own right, engaged the hunter-killer teams, slowing their advance with carefully placed shots. This forced Sharma to periodically shift her position, crawling with painstaking slowness from one hide to another, her movements economical and precise. She was a master of fieldcraft, using the terrain, the shadows, and the wind to remain unseen. After neutralizing another enemy RPG team in the valley, she would crawl 50 meters to a new firing position, settle in, and begin the cycle anew. The enemy hunters couldn't find her. They were chasing a phantom, firing at echoes, being slowly whittled down by Carter's defensive fire. On the valley floor, Major Thorne and his men were witnessing a miracle. The relentless, coordinated pressure of the enemy assault had faltered. It was still a desperate fight, but the enemy's movements were now hesitant, disorganized. The Rangers felt the shift, a subtle change in the rhythm of the battle. They gained a foothold, then another. They pushed the enemy back from their perimeter. They started to believe they might actually survive. They didn't know who was saving them, only that every time a key enemy weapon opened up, it was silenced moments later by the distant, lonely crack of a single rifle. They began to call her the Angel, a guardian spirit who had descended upon the valley to deliver them. They had been abandoned by their command, but they were not alone. Colonel Davies was in a state of controlled fury. His orders had been defied, and the two-person sniper team he had written off was now single-handedly disrupting the enemy's entire operational plan. It was an unprecedented act of insubordination. He was on the verge of declaring them rogue and authorizing a drone strike to eliminate them, a brutal but necessary act to restore command and control, when his intelligence officer, a young captain with a G2 background, burst into the command center. "Sir, you need to see this," the captain said, his voice urgent, overriding all protocol. He slapped a tablet down on the console in front of Davies. "It's Sergeant Sharma's file, the unredacted version. I had to get special clearance from Fort Bragg to access it." Davies glared at the captain, annoyed by the interruption, but the captain's sheer insistence made him look. He picked up the tablet. The file was sparse, most of it blacked out with digital ink. But the parts that were visible were staggering. Sergeant Anya Sharma was not just a Ranger-qualified sniper. She was a graduate of a clandestine special operations program so secret, Davies had only ever heard rumors of its existence. It was called Project Icarus, a program designed to create solo deep-cover operatives and strategic-level marksmen. Her instructors' ratings were off the charts, with comments that seemed like pure hyperbole. Once-in-a-generation talent. Possesses a near-supernatural understanding of ballistics and fieldcraft. Functions under pressure at a level we have never before documented. Her classified deployment history was a ghost tour of the world's most dangerous black sites. The official, confirmed kill count attached to her name was a number so high Davies had to read it twice to believe it. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He had not just ordered a talented sergeant to stand down. He had given a suicidal order to a living legend, a strategic weapon in human form, and she had quietly, respectfully, told him to go to hell. His decision to abandon the 2nd Battalion was no longer just a cold, tactical calculation. It was now a catastrophic blunder, a failure to understand the assets he had on the board. He had tried to sacrifice a pawn, only to discover it was his queen. The realization of who Sergeant Sharma was, and what she was doing, galvanized Colonel Davies into action. The shame of his earlier decision was a powerful motivator. He had made a colossal error in judgment, one that would have cost the lives of 300 men if not for the insubordination of a single soldier. Now, he had to salvage the situation and, in doing so, salvage his own career. He got on the command network, his voice a thunderclap of renewed authority. "All assets. I am rescinding my previous order. I repeat, I am rescinding the order to retreat. Operation Valley Forge is now a full-scale assault. I want every available air asset diverted to grid coordinates 479er. I want gunships, I want warthogs, I want it all. We are going to get our men out." The effect was instantaneous. The sky, which had been empty for hours, began to fill with the distant, growing roar of engines. For the Rangers trapped in the valley, it was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. The first to arrive were 2 Apache attack helicopters, their chain guns spitting fire and their rockets streaking down to obliterate the enemy's remaining fortified positions. They were followed by a pair of A-10 Warthogs, which made low, terrifying passes, their Gu-8 cannons tearing the enemy's formations to shreds. The arrival of overwhelming air power, combined with Sharma's continued, relentless sniping of enemy leaders, was the final straw for the enemy force. Their organized assault collapsed completely into a panicked, headlong retreat. The hunters became the hunted. Major Thorne, seizing the opportunity, rallied his men. "On your feet," he roared. "Push them back. Drive them out of this valley." The Rangers, energized by the reversal of their fortunes, surged forward, their battle cries mixing with the roar of the gunships above. They were no longer just surviving. They were winning. On her lonely perch, Sharma watched the tide turn. She fired a few final, precise shots, taking out enemy fighters who were attempting to organize a rearguard action. Her work was almost done. She had held the line. She had defied an order and, in doing so, had saved them all. She had kept the faith when no one else would. The battle for the valley was over. The Rangers had secured the area, and the process of evacuating the wounded and consolidating their position had begun. The enemy had been routed, leaving behind hundreds of dead and a vast amount of equipment. A battle that should have been a historic disaster for the U.S. military had been turned into a hard-won, almost miraculous victory. The architect of that victory was still on a lonely mountain 2 kilometers away. Major Cade Thorne, his face caked with dried blood and dirt, stood on the valley floor and looked up at the ridge where she had been operating. He felt a sense of awe so profound it was almost religious. He got on his command radio, asking for a direct link to Echo 3. After a moment of silence, her quiet voice came through the static. "Go for Ares 6. Thorne opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he possibly say? "Thank you" felt like a pathetic understatement. "You saved us" was a fact so obvious it was meaningless. He settled for the simple, unadorned truth. "Sharma," he said, using her name with a reverence he had previously reserved for battlefield legends. "We owe you everything. My men, they're alive because of you." Her reply was as quiet and professional as ever. "Just doing my job, Major." He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, but also the unshakable core of duty that had driven her to do the impossible. Later, as the last of the CH-47 Chinook helicopters was lifting the Rangers out of the valley, Thorne saw them. 2 small figures on a distant, windswept ridge, waiting for their own, separate extraction. He watched them until they were just specks in the distance, a silent, profound gesture of respect and gratitude passing from the commander on the ground to the ghost on the mountain. Back in the COC, Colonel Davies stood alone, looking at 2 things on his screen. One was the file of Sergeant Anya Echo Sharma. The other was the preliminary casualty list for the 2nd Battalion. The list was long and grievous, but it was a fraction of what it should have been. He owed his command, his career, and the lives of hundreds of soldiers to the quiet, unassuming sniper whose order to retreat he was eternally grateful she had ignored.